A warm greeting to the listener. I, Manavta, pursuing BSc Mathematics Honours. Second year will be reading the reading named On Hindu, Hindustan, Hinduism and Hindutva. Author Arvind Sharma. Summary. This paper sets out to examine the emergence and significance of word Hindu and associated terminology in discourse about India in order to determine the light in shades on what is currently happened in India. It concludes that the word and its derivatives contains a series of semantic bivalence is characterized by unresolved tensions and further that these tensions help account for the complexities generated by the induction of word Hindu in modern Indian political discourse. Hindu, a native of India, a Negro, a black Arabian, Indian or Ethiopian, a Gentoo or Hindu, a slave, a thief, adjective black. Hindustan, India, the country of Hindustan. The word Hindu, with allied formations such as Hindustan, Hinduism, and Hindutva, has come to possess a unique valence in the context of India, a valence denied to such words as India, Bharat, Aryadesh, or Madhyadesh. Aryadesh or Madhyadesh are synonyms of Hindustan. C. V. C. Smith, 1962, Takasu, 1066 by 118 Twink, 1990, Arya Dharma, Sanatan Dharma, or just Dharma as equivalents of Hinduism. C. Jeffrey Lott, 1996, and another ones, and Indianness or Hindut as an option for Hindutva. Mm. Now on page number 2 of the reading. Arguably, the earliest traceable use of the word Hindu appears in the Jend Avesta by Jackson. According to Jackson, 1922, ratio 3 to 4 to 3 to 5. The first chapter of Avestan, when the dead, whatever may be the age of chapter, contains an allusion to a portion of northern India in a list which it gives of 16 lands or regions created by Ahur Mazda and apparently regarded as under Iranian sway. The 15th of these domains, according to with 118, was Hapta Hindu, 7 rivers, a region of abnormal heat, probably identical with the territory of Sapta Sindhav's 7 rivers in the Ved, especially 8th section on page 24-27. A tension between two significations of term Hindu is already reflected in the two explanations offered of this occurrence. George Thompson in 1999 has recently argued that the imprecations of the non-believers found in both Avesta and Rigveda may actually reflect the religious differences of two communities at the time, an interpretation which already imparts to the term a religious favor. On the other hand, a Sachinian commentary imparts a political territory ring to it. The seven Hindukan, the expression seven Hindukan is due to this fact that overlordship is seven, and therefore I do not say seven rivers, for that is manifest from Avesta. One of the earliest datable as distinguished from traceable references to word Hindu again comes from Persia with the rise of the Archimedean Empire, according to H. W. Rawlinson in 1954 from page 53 to 54. An inscription of Darius I, which is considered to have been carved between 518 and 515 BC adds Hindu to the list of subject countries. Similarly, clay tablets from Persepolis in Elamite, datable to different years from 13th to 20th, 28th regional era of Darius, mention Hindu. These examples establishing the primacy of the territorial meaning are confirmed by Herodotus in his employment of the word as Indoi in Greek, which lacking an alphabetic character of the sound of H, did not in this case preserve it. He is preceded by Hecataeus in 1522, 520 BC as the first to mention India among surviving Greek writers. On page number 3 of the reading, there is evidence that Xerxes, son and successor of Darius, destroyed a century of devas or false divinities according to Persian concept, but the sanctuary was situated not in Hindu but in Gandhara. One of the newly discovered stone tablets at Persepolis records that Ceres by Ahura Mazda Wills shaped the foundation of certain temples of Devas and ordained that the Devas shall not be worshipped where the Devas had been worshipped. The king worshipped Ahura Mazda together with Ratna, divine world order. India may have been among the lands which witnessed the outcome of the religious zeal of Persian king. The India was still confined to Sindh, for it was under Xerxes that for the first time in history an Indian expeditionary force fought on the soil of Europe and even stormed the bloody defiles of Thermopylae. The Indian recruits to the army were called by two names, Gandharians and Indians, thereby confirming that while the former were from the province of Gandhar, listed as a separate province, the Indians were from the provinces controlled by the Persian Empire to east of the Sindhu and described as Hindu in the Armenian inscriptions. The word Hindu derives by common consent from the word Sindhu. It is remarkable that the direction of transformation of Sindhu to Hindu to Ind is paralleled in the account of Buddhist pilgrim Shen Shuang Hensang, that is also called Hensang in 7th century, by the words Shin Tu, Han Tu Tan Shu, and even more surprisingly, that is becomes into, at which point its connotation overflows into the religions, at least in Sanzong's interpretation of it. Now, here's the heading names of India. On examination, we find that the names of India, Tanshu, are various and perplexing as to their authority. It was anciently called Shinto or also Hentho, but now, according to the right pronunciation, it is called Intho. The people of Intho call their country by different names according to their district. Each country has diverse customs. Aiming a general name which is best sounding, we will call the country Intho, that is in slash tu. In Chinese, this name signifies the moon. The moon has many names, of which this is one. For us, it is said that all living things usually revolve in the wheel of transmigration. through the long night of ignorance. Without a guiding star, their case is like the sun gone down, as then the torch afford it connecting light. Though there be the shining of the stars, how different from bright moon. Just so the bright connected light of holy men and sages, guiding the world as shining of the moon, have made this country eminent, and so it is called in Hindu. Hindu. The successor pilgrim, I think, however, remarks some say Indu means the moon, and the Chinese name for India, that is Indu, is derived from it. Although it may mean this, it is nevertheless not the common name. As one concludes this rapid survey of the word Hindu in the ancient period, it is worth contrasting the different semantic destinies of the same word in the East and West. Shindu becomes India in Greek, acquiring a purely territorial reference, never compromised once acquired, but in the East it became Hindu in Chinese, in the process acquiring a religious ambience. Now, second section on page number fourth of the reading. Thus, in the ancient world, the formation of the original word Sindhu bifurcated semantically along different lines as the word traveled to the west and the east in its Persian and Greek acceptations. The word became a signifier of a region, that is, which was restricted to the lower Indus in the case of early Persians and extend to cover the whole of India in case of Greeks. In its Chinese acceptation, it possessed a religious dimension as explained by Song. When India came in contact with Arabia and later the Islamic world, the same word Sindhu again gave rise to two words whose meanings became both more distinct and more settled when compared to the usages of the ancient world, crystallizing as Hind, through Sindh, to denote the land of India, and Hindu, to denote the follower of religion. The first use preceded the second. India was known as Al Hind in pre Islamic Arabia. Hindu simply meant an Indian until it acquired a religious connotation. On page number 5th of the reading, a religious connotation, it continued to be used as a synonym for an Indian in some parts of the world. In fact, according to Wilfred Cantwell Smith, the use of Hindu in the meaning Indian survived in popular English into 20th century. I can remember as a boy that in Canada we discriminated red Indians from Hindu Indians, and I have heard the phrase a Hindu Muslim as distinguished from Arab or a Turkish Muslim. This need not surprise us. Word Sindhu originally had a geographical referent, and one's interest now must focus on when and how it managed to acquire a religious signification. The use of word Hindu in the sense can be dated with some precision. It begins with Arab invasion of Sindh by Muhammad ibn Qasim in 712. The administrative arrangements which Muhammad ibn Qasim made with the non-Muslim after his victory over Dahar are often referred to as the Brahmanand settlement. The basic principle was to treat the Hindus as people of the book and to confer on them the status of Jimmis. The Hindus now were a people who followed a religion other than Islam. Right here, the word displays an ambiguity which it retains to this day. namely its unresolved relation with the Buddhist. For when Hazrat Muhammad bin Qasim's ambitious father-in-law and viceroy of western provinces approved the request for repairing a damaged temple, he refers to the fact of being petitioned by thief inhabitants of Brahmanand. Hindus now were a people who followed a religion other than Islam. Right here, the word displays an ambiguity which is retains to this day, namely its unresolved relations with the Buddhist. For when Hazrat Muhammad bin Qasim's ambitious father-in-law and viceroy of the western provinces approved the request for repairing a damaged temple, he refers to the fact of being petitioned by the chief inhabitants of Brahmanand, Brahmanabad, to be allowed to repair the temple of Buddha and to pursue their religion. Is the Buddha here the same as the Buddha? In any case, while it is true that both Hindus and Buddhists would be Jimmis regardless, did he know the difference? It is also worth noting that according to one early Muslim historian, the Arab conqueror continued even the privileged positions of Brahmanas, not only in religious matters but also in administrative sphere. The significance of Arab conquest of Sindh for the subsequent history of India, as recounted in a following passage, is also of significant of excise. The conquest of Sindh by Muhammad bin Qasim and the incorporation of that province into Muslim universal caliphate brought the Hindus and the Muslims there in a relationship of very different nature, that of the ruled and the ruler. This form of political relationship, which some centuries later extended to the whole subcontinent, survived until well into 18th century, inevitably led to the creation of tensions which determined very largely the psychological course of the history of medieval and modern India. Not only is the Hindu now identified on a religious basis, conversion from this Hindu religion now become possible. It has been asserted, for instance, that Muhammad bin Qasim's boldest innovation was the appointment of Siskar, the former minister of his vanquished adversary Raja Dahir, as his advisor after Siskar had accepted Islam. Collaboration with non Hindu rulers also became possible, as illustrated by the case of Kaksh, Raja Dahir's nephew. According to an early historian, he was a learned man and philosopher of Hindu. When he came to transact business, Muhammad bin Qasim used to make him sit before the throne and then consult him, and Kaksa took precedence in the army before all the nobles and commanders. He collected the revenue of the country and the treasury was placed under his seal. He assisted Muhammad bin Qasim in all his undertakings and was addressed by the title of Mubarak Musir, which means prosperous counselor, mentioned in Ikram 1964 on page 10 to 11. And if Muhammad bin Qasim also married Rani Ladi, Dahar's widow, thus becoming the master of Lower Sindh, then a pattern of Hindu Muslim interaction was put in place which became archetypal in some ways, with profound implication for the meaning of the word Hindu. Although Islamic rule over Sindh did not long survive Muhammad bin Qasim's death, it is when we reach the next phase of Islamic contact with India that a major divide surfaces. as Narayani Gupta notes, it is fashionable to criticize meal, but to most Indians, pre-colonial India has two pasts, and the attack on Somnath by Muhammad of Ghazni in 1025 has the same emotive significance as the Turks' conquest Constantinople in 1453 had for conventional European history. Thus, in the time of Muhammad of Ghazna, reigned from 1998 to 1030, the word Hindu continued on its religious semantic journey. According to Percival Spear, Muhammad conquest set up in Indian minds a tradition of Muslim intolerance. In the popular Hindu mind, a Muslim was a intolerant as a Baniya was avaricious or a Rajput brave. Perhaps the chance of ultimate conversion of of India to Islam was lost in the of Muhammad's idol breaking. This, however, tells us more about the evolving meaning of Islam for the Hindu than the evolving meaning of the term Hindu. For that, we have to turn to famous scholar Al-Biruni, who was patronized by Muhammad and who refers to Hindus as our religious antagonists in the preface of his much lauded book on India. In the book itself, however, he aimed to describe what he observed phenomenologically, as we would call it now, so that one could discuss with questions of religion, science, literature on the very basis of their own civilization. Al Biruni's account is intriguing. We find him wrestling with issues which bedevil the study of Hinduism to this day. To cite only a few, first, what was the relationship between Hinduism and Buddhism? Al Biruni distinguishes between the two, but he does not fail to note that the Buddhists are closer to Hindus than the Muslims. He writes in striking passage that is below. Another circumstances which increased the already existing antagonism between Hindus and foreigners is that the so-called Shamaniya, that is Buddhists, though they cordially hate Brahmins, still are nearer akin to them than to others. In former time, Khorasan, Persis, Iraq, Mosul, the country up to the frontier of Syria was Buddhistic, but then Zarathustra went forth from Azerbaijan and preached magism in Burk, that is Bhaktra. His doctrine came into favor with King Gustav, and his son Isfandial spread the new faith both in East and West, both by force and by treaties. He founded fire temples through his whole empire, from the frontiers of China to those of Greek Empire. The succeeding kings made their religion, that is Zoroastrianism, the obligatory state religion for Persia and Iraq. In consequence, the Buddhists were banished from those countries and had to emigrate to the countries east of Balkh. Second, who speaks for Hinduism? According to Al-Bruni, the main and most essential point of Hindu world of thought is that which Brahmins think and believe, for they are specifically trained for preserving and maintaining their religion. And this is what we shall explain with the beliefs of Brahmins. It is clear that who speaks for Hinduism was an issue then as it is now, although Al-Biruni chose to resolve uh, it in his own way. Is Hinduism a is Third, is Hinduism a creedal or an ethical religion? Al-Bruni describes Hinduism with gusto, but when it comes to defining it, there are problems. On page number 8 of the reading, at one point he veers towards creedal definition. As the word of confession, there is no God but God. Muhammad is his prophet, is the shibboleth of Islam, the Trinity that of Christianity, and the Institute of the Sabbath that of Judaism. So, psychosis is the shibboleth of the Hindu religion. Therefore, he who does not believe in it does not belong to them and is not reckoned as one of them. But did Al-Biruni not know that Buddhists also believed in it? So here we are back to the problem of fluid boundaries. The situation is even more complex, for his description clearly testifies to the internal diversity of Hinduism. One often encounters such expressions as some Hindus believes, other holds and other holds the more traditional view that, and continued. Hindus differs among themselves. Some Hindus maintain, according to others, the common people describe these things. Continued. The educated Hindus do not share these opinions. Some Hindus say, and continued, others have told me, and continued. If we now pass from the ideas of educated people among the Hindus to those of the common people, we must first state that they present a great variety, etc. Al-Biruni seems to be oscillating between what Richard H. Davis has described as centralist and pluralist views of approaching Hinduism already. In terms of this distinction, centrists identify a single pan-Indian, more or less hegemonic Orthodox tradition transmitted primarily in Sanskrit language, chiefly by members of Brahmanic class. The tradition centers around a Vedic lineage of texts in which are included not only the Vedas themselves but also the Mimamsa, Dharmashastra, and Vedanta corpuses of text and teachings. Vedic sacrifice is the privileged mode of ritual conduct, the template for all subsequent Indian rituals. Various groups employs vernacular languages in preference to Sanskrit, questioning the caste order and rejecting the authority of Vedas. Many periodically rebel against the center, but the Orthodox, through an adept use and inclusion and repulsive tolerance, managed to hold the high ground of religious authority. On page number 9, reading, there is a heading. On the other hand, in 1995, from page 6 to 7, the pluralist, by contrast, envision a decentered profusion of ideas and practices, all tolerated and incorporated under the big tent of Hinduism. No more concise statement of this view can be found than that of eminent Sanskrit scholar J.A.P. Buchanan in the 1986 Encyclopedia Britannica. In principle, Hinduism incorporates all forms of beliefs and worship without necessitating the selection or elimination of any. The Hindu is inclined to revere the divinity in every man's manifestation, whatever it may be, and is doctrinally tolerant. Hinduism is then both civilization and a conglomeration of religions with neither a beginning, a founder, nor central authority, hierarchy, or organization. The uses of word Hindu in the subsequent period retains the two ambiguities. First, whether it refers to a reason or a religion, and second, whether as religion it is to be understood in a centralist or pluralist manner. Thus, during the Delhi Sultanate from 1200 to 1526, the word Hindu on the other hand denoted a religion, on the other a region, and it imprints this ambivalence on geography. If the Arabian traveler Ibn Battuta is to be believed, he states that Hindu Kush or Hindu killer became known as such because of the number of Indian slaves who perished in passing its nose. Would these Indian slaves not have been mostly Hindu? By the time the Delhi Sultanate was replaced by Mughal Empire, after it had been consolidated by Akbar the Great, reigned from 1556 to 1605, the question of defining Hinduism once again began to pose the kind of problems it has before and since. A well known text of this period is Dabistan e Mazhab, which attempts an overview of the religious landscape of the empire. Irfan Habib writes, there were the religious traditions coming from ancient India, which by Mughal times began to be described under the term Hindu. The author of Dabistan e Mazhab is hard put to describe what the beliefs of a Hindu are, and ultimately he takes shelter in a very convenient position. Hindus are those who, when arguing with each other within the same framework of argument over the centuries, if they recognize each other as persons whom we can either support or oppose in a religious argument, then both parties are Hindus. The Jains, although they rejected Brahmanism, were still Hindus because they were arguing and polemicizing with Brahmins. Such arguments were not taking place between Hindus and Muslims. The Muslims did not share any basic terminology with the other. Muslim had their own framework, an ideological framework, the semantic framework. On page number 10 of the reading, it is necessary to introduce a broader consideration at this point, which will prove to be lasting significance. Although one is accustomed to looking at the Indian historical reality in terms of Hindu Muslim polarity, this must always be tempered with a recognition of of the pluralism which characterized India. There were always many castes and kingdoms. After 1000 Christ, just as there could be castes which are not Hindu, so too there could be kingdoms which were not Hindu. But just as the broad framework of multiple castes could accommodate aberration or deviation of exceptions, so could the multiple kingdoms accommodate the new Muslim kingdoms, thereby continuing rather than replacing the tradition of intense militarism of ancient pre-Muslim India. It is perhaps worth comparing the situation of India which that in China here, and to recognize that Sanskritization differs from Sinicization in that it is a more pluralistic, less unitary process. The social pluralism of caste and the political pluralism of multiple kingdoms also played off each other to produce the same outcome all the more. The significance of the following fascinating details passes beyond the level of the ans- anecdotal in this light, that the icono- iconoclast Mahmud of Gajna permitted image worship to his Hindu subjects in the separate quarter in his own capital, and at least three Hindu generals Sundar, Nath, and Tilak rose to positions of high responsibility in the Ghaznavid army, and that while Firoz Tughlaq pursued theocratical policies, his bodyguard consisted of Rajputs headed by Bhiru Bhati, a relative of his mother. It is not being claimed either that the Hindu and Muslim communities had evolved into or towards a single culture, nor opposite being claimed that they remained poles apart beneath a veneer of accord. Now, on page number 11 of the reading, the claim is much more modest that the social, political, and religious pluralism of the Indian reality allowed for a certain measure of permeability, malleability, and fluidity, which may have been subsequently lost. The problem of boundaries with respect to Hindu religion in general is a difficult one and seems to become more so during early medieval or late medieval or early modern periods. Areas which are battleground between conventional and progressive historians in India nowadays. On numerous occasions, Hindus and Muslims are not distinguished as such, while communities within them are. During the early medieval period, according to Chattopadhyay 1998, the predicaments of early modern period in this regard are best indicated by the headache. The 30, 35,000 strong community of Hindu Mohammedans in Gujarat, caused for the Bombay census superintended as late as 1911 on account of his inextricable combination of multiple practices, beliefs, and even self definitions. The latter was pulled up sharply by his superior census commissioner E. A. Getz, who ordered the location of persons concerned to the one or the other as best as he could. Harjot S. Oberoi has drawn pointed attention to this aspect of fluid religious loyalties in early modern period, which William S. Limon experienced firsthand in 1849 when he passed through Bharak. He thought it strange that Hindus should revere Muslim shrine there of Shahid Salar as much as Muslim. All our Hindu camp followers paid as much reverence to the shrine as they passed as the Mohammedans. The Hindus worshipped any sign of manifested might or power, though exerted against themselves. The point then is that in the pre 1900 period, lateral accommodation of non Hindu elements in general and Muslims in particular was possible at the social and political levels. Moreover, these traditions themselves, the Hindu and the Muslim, were plural in nature, a fact which further coincided with the process and further it. On page number 12 of the reading, such accommodation was no longer possible after a point under British rule because of simultaneous development of the concept of nation and monolithic religions. The first development meant that political differences based on religion could not be accommodated regionally. Given the emergent concept of a nation, they had to be dealt with at the national level in the singular. Moreover, the monolithization of Hindu and Islamic traditions closed off the fissures of adjustment between them socially and locally, and made them face and then confront each other as single consolidated entities. The ruled by which the game had to be played now were radically altered, both in terms of the players and playing field. Now, here start the section third. It is important to interrupt the discussion of religious significance of the word Hindu to cast a glance at another word which had by now come into play, namely Hindustan. As we do so, we might do well to recognize that in the word Hindu we confronted two ambiguities or a double ambiguity. First one, whether it signifies a geographical or religious referent, and second one, if it denotes a religion, then what constitutes it. The word Hindustan may well serve as metaphor of the first ambiguity. The word literally means the land of Hindus and had become a common word for India, especially North India, by 13th century. It raises the natural query: how is the word Hindu to be taken here as a resident of a geographical region, or as the follower of a particular faith, or as the resident of particular region who is also the follower of particular faith? All these senses are possible because of tremendous demographic overlap between the two categories. Ultimately, the meaning remains unclear. One might initially think that an allusion to a place in the word itself would orient its meaning geographically. This is indeed so, but the significance continues to remain double edged, for it could be taken to mean either the abode of Indians or the abode of Hindus. On page number 13 of the reading, this statement could be made either descriptively or pejoratively, depending on how one felt about the Hindus. It has been used in all these senses. We are not done yet with the word, for in its adjectival form, it opens up another vista of meaning. If one sense of the word Hindustan includes all Indians and another Hindus, then its adjectival form it seems to reach out for a sense which reconciles both, and especially Hindus and Muslims. This is most obvious in the pre-Persian proposal that Indians lingua franca be Hindustani, which states a middle course between Sanskritizing Hindi and Persianizing and urbanizing Urdu as the language of undivided subcontinent. In this sense of happy compromise, the word seems to be back a few centuries. Babur, for instance, even though that the Indians, Hindus, and Muslims together had evolved their own way of living together with each other by the time of foundation of Mughal Empire, or led by him in India, he called it the Hindustani way. Now here's section 4. If we wish to connect this historical discussion of the terms Hindu with first modern and then contemporary developments in India, then one crucial question need to be asked in order to make his transition. When did the Hindus themselves begin to use the word self referentially? Granting that the word Hindu is not a Hindu word, the key question then is, when did the Hindus start using the word Hindu for themselves? Such usage begins to emerge at least by the 16th century, as pointed out by Joseph T. O'Connell. But R.A. Frankenberg observes, but here it appears only in text describing episodes of strained relationships between Hindus and as natives and Muslims as foreigners. The term, we are told, was never used by Hindus among themselves to describe themselves. Moreover, the term Hindu Dharma, which occurs 7 times, 4 times in Bengali text, was only used in the same way and never with any explicit definition or discussion of what Hindu or Hindu Dharma itself meant. Hindu Dharma, therefore, is the closest resemblance to the term Hinduism which can be found to have arisen out of indigenous sources within India. Now, here's page number 14. The reading. It is, however, possible to identify the self use of the word Hindu in an even earlier period. It is clear that by the 16th century, Hindus were referring to themselves as Hindus. Eknath from 1548 to 1600 writes, If I call myself a Hindu, I will be beaten up, and a Muslim I am not. Earlier on, several rulers of Vijayanagar had taken the title Hinduraya Surtarna, Sultan of Hindu kings, in imitation of sultans of Madurai and Bahmani sultans. Five inscriptions from the reign of Bukka, which reigned from 1344 to 1377, and its use can also be traced in four cases by kings of Vijayanagar, fourth and last dynasty, with another five uses in the intervening period, including some by Krishna Dev Rai, ran from 1509 to 1529. Some inscription of Bukka, the prefix Hindu is dropped. Thus, beginning with 1352, the title in one form or another continued in use by Bukka's successor for at least 250 years through three changes in dynasty. The expression is not entirely free from ambiguity, but it is generally accepted that Sultana is a Sanskritized form of Islamic Sultan. According to Vasundhara Filozat, it is a title which would have been given to Bukka by his Muslim neighbors. According to Harman Kulke, it seems likely that the early kings of Vijayanagar laid claim to a status among the Hindu Rajas equal to that of Sultan among the Muslim rulers. Philippine B. Wagner is prepared to make a stronger claim and suggests that both titles Sultan and Sultan among the Hindu kings were used in much more literal and direct sense as a means of proclaiming that the Vijayanagar ruler could actually be considered a sultan, not in terms of relative political understanding, but in concrete terms of substance and style. Now, on page number 15 of the reading, particular the title Hindurya's Sultana would have served to differentiate its bearer from the ordinary Hindu king, signaling his willingness to participate in the political discourse of Islamic civilization. Wagoner, however, renders Hindu as inconsistently with his view that the Hindu vs Muslim rhetoric in his historiography of the Vijayanagar Empire has been overdone. This may well be so, and the issue takes us to the heart of the matter if we formulate the issues as follows. How is Hindu in the expression Hinduraya Surtarna to be understood? Wagoner focuses on Sutarna. We need to focus on the word Hindu. Is this Hindu here as in India or as in followers of Hinduism? An ambiguity encountered earlier in Persian word Hindustan for India. Does it mean the land of Indians or Hindus? It is it that outsiders or Persians, particularly Persians, use it in the first sense, but Indians themselves also in the second, as when one might say describe the partition of India as the division of Hindustan into Pakistan and Hindustan. Here, reversal is encountered. Pakistanis may take Hindustan to mean both the land of Indians and of Hindus simultaneously, but Indians would, in that case, use it only in former sense of Indians, inclusive of both Hindus and Muslims, as both inhabit present-day Hindustan. In a sense, therefore, the issue remains with us, but in another sense, it is resolved. Hindus are clearly using the word to refer to themselves, uh, although whether they are using it to refer to themselves geographically, culturally, or religiously may not be entirely unproblematic. Nevertheless, that there is religious component in this situation, while it could be excreted, cannot be denied. One may propose that by 14th century the use of word Hindu did include an element of Hindu self-consciousness. The case of Shivaji in relation of Mughal Empire provides us interesting example. King Akbar firmly established Mughal rule over India. He was known as Padsha and his rule as Padshahi. Historians have described Shivaji's life mission in similar terms as one of establishing a Hindu Padshahi. In a letter written in 1946 AD, Shivaji describes his earnest desire to establish a Hindavi Swarajya. Was Shivaji aiming to establish Hindu self rule or Indian self rule? Or, or was it the case that as the opponent was perceived as foreigner both by lineage and religion, there was no need to draw such a distinction? Our task on hand, however, is not to try to answer these questions but to note that the ambiguity in relation to the word Hindu persists when Hindus themselves start to use these terms, and both the ambiguity persists. It is not always clear whether the connotation is geographical and religious, and it is not always clear what comprises Hinduism if the reference in terms of faith happens to be in ambiguous. Chart King notes, although indigenous use of the term by Hindus themselves can be found as early as the uh, 15th and 16th centuries, its uses was derivative of Persian Muslim influences and did not represent anything more than a distinction between indigenous or native and foreign. For instance, when Belgian theory Verhelst interviewed an Indian intellectual from Tamil Nadu, he recorded the following interchange. Question was, are you a Hindu? Answer, no, I grew critical of because of casteism. Actually, you should not ask people if they are Hindu. This does not mean much. If you ask them what their religion is, they will say, I belong to this caste. He goes on to say, indeed, it is clear that the term Hindu, even when used by indigenous Indian, did not have the specifically religious connotations which is subsequently developed under Orientalist influences until 19th century. Thus, 18th century references to Hindu Christians or Hindu Muslim were not uncommon, as Romelia Thapar points out in her discussion of her reception of Muslim into India. The people of India do not seem to have perceived the new arrivals as a unified body of Muslims. The name Muslim does not occur in the records of early contacts. The term used was either ethnic Turksha, referring to the Turks, or geographical Yuvana or cultural militia. One, one should also note the distinctively negative nature of the term, the primary function of which it to provide a catch-all designation for the other, whether negatively contrasted with the Asian Persians, with their Muslim descendants, or with the later European Orientalist who eventually adopted the term. Indeed, the same is apparent from examination of modern. One should also note the distinctively negative nature of the term, the primary function of which is to provide a catch-all designation for the other, whether negatively contrasted with the Asian Persians, with their Muslim descendants, or with the later European Orientalists who eventually adopted the term. Indeed, the same is apparent from an examination of modern India law. For example, the 1955 to Marriage Act Section 2 1 defines a Hindu as a category including not only all Buddhist, Jain, Sikhs, but also anyone who is not Muslim, Christian, a Parsi, or a Jew. Thus, even in the contemporary context, the term Hindu and Hinduism an essentially negative appellation appellation, functioning as an all inclusive rubric for the non Judeo Christian other. Now, on the page number 17 of the reading, despite this lack of clarity for the word Hindu, now section 5th on page number 17th of the reading, despite the lack of clarity, the word Hindu, after a brief period of flirtation with the other words, was adopted by the British to characterize all things in India, elements and features found in cultures and religions of India which were not Muslim, not Christian, not Jewish, and not Western. It is now time to pause and take stock before we venture into the British period by examining the history of word Hindu and its uses. It becomes obvious that the word did not come into common use until after 1000 AD. During this pre-thousand period, India represented a single politico-religio-cultural entity. Subsequently, its use gradually spread in such a way that by 18th century it became a common locution of often used by both insiders and outsiders to denote a religio-cultural complexity which was distinct from, also different from, and sometimes diametrically opposed to Islamic presence. In religio-cultural terms itself, the presence of another religion, a religio-cultural complex, now also characterized the land, namely the Islamic. The British presence in India introduced another religio-cultural complex on top of it, namely Western Christian. Up to a point, the British presence in India could most be considered benignly neutral, if not actually pro Hindu from a Hindu perspective. Has even been plausibly argued that the company's Raj was actually, for most intents and purposes, de facto Hindu Raj. By this I mean several things: that the Raj, as an imperial system of rule, was a genuinely indigenous rather than simply a foreign construct, that hence it was more Indian than British in its inner logic, regardless of external interference and violations of that logic by Britain, that in terms of religious institution, indigenous elites and local forces of all kinds were able to receive recognition and protection as well as special concessions from the state, and moreover that they had been able to do this in direction proportion to their ability, whether by power of information control, numbers, noise, skill, wealth, to influence local governments. A breach opens up after 1818, the year in which both the Maratha Confederacy was defeated, thereby eliminating the last major challenge to British paramountcy in India, and also the year in which James Mill published his famous multi volume work clinically entitled The History of British India, which was really a philosophic against Hinduism. On page number 18 of the reading, Mill's history, an immense and thorough indictment for the Indian peoples, tried to justify the need for British rule among a population supposed unable to govern itself. Mill specifically condemned Hinduism, blamed it much of what was wrong with India. Hinduism is ritualistic, superstitious, irrational, and repressed ridden. Mill charged at each step Dicity, contrasting it with the deist version of Christianity that he believed to be the highest form of religion. For several decades, The East India Company provided a copy of Mill's tomb to new company officials embarking for India to sustain them in their sense of racial and cultural superiority while in the colony. Yes, after an initial phase of Hindu sympathy, the rule relationship came in the force, basically affecting, if not wrapping, the reception of his Western Christian religion culture complex as well. It is not and as widely recognized as it should be. The 1818 to 1857 period was characterized by an intense effort to convert India, or at least the Indian army, to Christianity. Of the return of supposed guests of Somnath from Ghazni during the First Afghan War under Lord Ellenborough also falls during this, an ambition that was only abandoned when the Indian mutiny raised the stakes forbiddingly. In fairness, it should be noted that the Muslims were blamed disproportionately for it, although both Hindu and Muslim boys were treated with equal severity during the suppression. This second wave of Hindu sympathy on the other part of the British Empire, with the rise of nationalism, for which the year 1885, in which the Indian National Congress was founded, provides a conventional benchmark. On page number 19 of the reading, the upshot of all these developments was the fact that another religious community apart from the Islamic, namely the Christian, had also created. What needs to be clearly recognized in this context is the role of politics in positioning these communities in an oppositional rather than an oppositional framework in relation to Hindu. The existence of Jews and Parsis testified to the fact that minorities are not unknown to Hindus, but they did not pose a problem for Hindu polity because their presence was not visualized vitiated by the ruler ruled. That is political factor. Until that factor emerged, even Islamic presence was not perceived as a problem. Arab Muslim traders on India's coast between the 7th and 9th century were treated with tolerance by Hindu rulers, and the legend of the conversion of Sherman Perumal Raja shows that they were allowed to propagate Islam. At least one contributed financially to a Hindu temple. Even in the north, there is persistent local tradition in certain old centers in the heart of Uttar Pradesh that Muslim families had settled there long before the conquest of area of Muhammad Ghori. In the city of Benares, there are Muslim mullahs, which it is said are interior indeed to conquest of Benares by Muslim, and similar traditions are current about Manair in Bihar. Even after the altered political equation in the north made the Muslim presence problematical for Hindu, it did not affect the south. Thus, Abdul Razak, the Persian ambassador at Vijayanagar court, could uh, write around the middle of the 15th century, "The people are infidels. Consequently, I considered myself in an enemy's country, as the Mohammedans considered everyone who has not received the Quran. Yet I admitted that I meet with perfect toleration and even favor. We have two mosques and are allowed to pray in public. Similarly, the uh, Syrian Christian presence in India did not pose a problem for Hindu, but European Christian presence became a problem when Christians became ruler and Hindus are ruled. The fluid situation, however, began to solidify in the post-mutiny period once the rule of East India Company was taken over by British Crown. This consolidation of British rule was accompanied by the consolidation of Hinduism One needs to step back a little to appreciate this development. Here's page number 20 of the reading and section 6. The British presence in India had put another word into play, Hinduism. The discussion of when it was first used is itself indicative of of its significance, while the controversy surrounding its relationship with what poses for Hindu attests more generally to basic thesis of the paper. The Oxford English Dictionary identifies it used by Max Muller in 1858. Charles Newman employed it in the title of of his work in 1831. The Oxford English Dictionary identifies a still earlier use in 1829, but Dermot Killingly identifies its use by Remo Roy in 1816 and suggests that Remo was probably the first Hindu to use the word Hinduism, although we are not quite certain whether it was first used by a Hindu. But the word soon caught on, and with the linguistic unification of India through English and the increasing use of Hindi English in intrafaith activity with Hinduism at the level of emerging English knowing elite in the post Mutiny period. This period also saw the culmination, as it were, of the numerous reform movements, beginning with Brahmo Samaj founded in 1828 and culminating the Gandhian dispensation, leading to an increasing identification of Indian nationalism was Reformed Hinduism. Thus, the last quarter of 19th century witnessed the emergence of both Indian nationalism and pan-Indian Hinduism, thereby raising the question of the relationship between the two. This issue, which remains unresolved to this day, goes back to the ambiguity inherent in word Hindu. Does it stand for a country or a religion? The fact that both are word, India as well as Hindu, etymologically go back to the same word, dramatizes this issue of ambiguity, which now reincarnated itself in the question: will Indian nationalism be territorial or religious in nature? The cementing ambiguity in the word Hindu itself also found expression in the question whether the new Hinduism itself will be patriarchal or universal in character. One can thus visualize two channels along which the energies released by emerging nationalist forces in India could play themselves out when the port was tried by partition of Bengal in 1905. One channel along which the nationalist energies could flow was that of territorial nationalism as an aspirational aspiration represented by the Indian National Congress. Another was represented by All India Muslim League, formed in 1906, more in line with the optional channel of religious nationalism, although there was an initial Hindu reaction also to move in the direction. It was basically checked by the rise of Gandhian influence in India politics from 1920 onwards and the primacy which the Indian National Congress began to enjoy thereafter. India and Hindu nationalism became to diverge after the after the collapse of the Khilafat movement in 1982. The Khilafat campaign, which began with the Muslim joining forces with the Hindus before the incredulous eyes of British, ended in a series of communal raids by mid 1920s. The founding of RSS in 1925 symbolized this bridge. In the meantime, Neo Hinduism was being revived along essentially universalistic lines, although it became somewhat revivalistic with the rise of Arya Samaj. Nevertheless, the Indian National Congress was able to contain this. It was in 1920s that Neo Hinduism began to display a distinctly ethnic streak and evolved a word to go with Hindutva. Now, here's section 7 of the cheating. The word Hindutva gained currency after it appeared as the title of a book written by V.D. Savarkar, first published in 1923. V.D. Savarkar and Mahatma Gandhi may be regarded as the patron saints of the two distinct forms of Hinduism, and ambiguity of word Hindu gave rise to paradoxical, and it might appear both these trends arose out the same problematic, that of defining Hinduism, and both were, in a sense, a response to attempted definitions of Hinduism under Western ages. Western attempts at defining Hinduism followed two distinct courses. One moved in the direction of identifying it with Brahmanism, and the other in the direction of identifying it with spirituality in general. They reflect perhaps the Enlightenment and Romantic movement at play respectively on the onomastic theatre of Hinduism. It is not often realized that one of the major concerns of V.D. Savarkar in involving the concept of Hindutva was to avoid the political fallout of excessive narrow definition of Hinduism, which had unhappy consequence of excluding the Buddhists, the Sikhs, and the Jains from the Hindu community. By comparison, Gandhi did not have much trouble with their inclusion within or exclusion from Hinduism, because from the point of view of spiritual interpretation of Hinduism, which he espoused, this was immaterial. All religions shared in the spirituality in common with Hinduism, irrespective of whether they could formally be labeled Hindu or not. For instance, when S. Radhakrishnan posed the question, "What is your religion?" 1936, Mahatma Gandhi replied, "My religion is Hinduism, which for me is religion of humanity and includes the best of all religions known to me." The full title of V.D. Savarkar's tract, Hindutva, Who is a Hindu, identifies the two core issues which he addresses. First, who is a Hindu? And second, what is Hindutva? The two issues are connected. He defines a Hindu as one who first regards the entire subcontinent as his or her motherland or fatherland. Second, is descendant of Hindu parents. And third, considers this land holy. These then constitute the three essentials of Hindutva: a common nation, a common race, that is Jati, and a common civilization or Sanskriti. Note that religion does not figure in this as ensemble, and the actual essential of Hindutva are also the ideal essential of nationality. The net effect of the exercise is to confer a Hindu nationality on the followers of four religions of Indian origin: Hinduism, Buddhism, Jainism, and Sikhism. Now, page number 23 of the thing. In essence, a response to the attempted definitions of Hinduism under Western ages, Western attempts at defining Hinduism followed two distinct courses. One moved in the direction of identifying it with Brahmanism, and the other in the direction of identifying it with spirituality in general through Hindu tolerance. They reflect perhaps the Enlightenment and Romantic movement at the play respectively on the onomastic theatre of Hinduism. It is not often realized that one of the major concerns of V.D. Savarkar in involving the concept of Hindutva was to avoid the political fallout of an excessively narrow definition of Hinduism, which had the unhappy consequence of excluding the Buddhists, the Sikhs, the Jains from the Hindu community. By comparison, Gandhi did not have much trouble with their inclusion within or exclusion from Hinduism, because from the point of view of spiritual interpretation of Hinduism, which he espoused, this was immaterial. All religions had in this spirituality in common with Hinduism, irrespective of whether they could formally be labeled Hindu or not. For instance, when S. Radhakrishnan posed the question, "What is your religion?" in 1936, Mahatma Gandhi replied, "My religion is Hinduism, which for me is religion of humanity, includes on page 23 of the section. One may wish to distinguish here between two expressions, Indian religions and religions practiced in India. If the latter category is used to denote Hinduism, Buddhism, Jainism, Sikhism, and Judaism, Christianity, Islam, and so on, then the former category could be used to include only the adherents of the first. For Hinduism, Buddhism, Jainism, and Sikhism, according to the concept of Hindutva as created by Savarkar, Hindu nationality would be restricted to Indian religions. In contrast, resembling with Indians, nationality with would be shared by followers of all religions. This is one salient feature of Hindutva. The other, as noted already, consisted of fact that it possessed an implicit distinction between religion and culture in order to bracket the four Indian religions together. Savarkar's vision lay moribund for a long time, to the extent of being considered dead. This may be one way to of explaining why Western scholars, even in 1960s, were actually dissuaded by their Indian colleagues from showing interest in any political and cultural outfit associated with Hindutva, such as the Jain Sangh and the RSS. Ever since Mrs. Gandhi's emergency, however, these organizations, in their various incarnations, have been incrementally raising their profile and now stand center stage at the beginning of the new millennium. Most Indian and Western scholars feel uncomfortable in dwelling with religion given their secular orientation, and discomfort level rises further when it comes to fundamentalism in religion. This is understandable, but it has led to lack of nuance in dealing with key concepts. Hindutva provides an example here. Most regard it as constituting a statical and monolithic concept of 1923 onwards when it was first proposed. The reality is that its context, text, and subtext has changed over time, depending on the period involved or and the person expounding it. Up until the attainment of independence in 1947, the thrust of the Hindutva movement was represented by the Hindu Mahasabha and the RSS, was first to resist what was viewed as a policy of appeasement towards the Muslim and to oppose the move towards the partition of India, which was viewed as the logical outcome of this policy. Page number 24 of the reading. During this phase, the Hindutva movement was not about gaining political power. This shift in Hindutva thinking came about as a result of reflection at the ease with which the party in power, the Indian National Congress, could suppress the Hindutva forces in the wake of as- assassination of Mahatma Gandhi in 1948. The realization led to the formation of Jan Sangh in 1951. Uh, Graham During the period when the Jan Sangh functioned as a party, the concept of Hindutva underwent an ideological shift. It took the form of identifying Hindu with identifying India with Hindutva rather than Hindutva with India. As a result, there was a much talk of need for Indianizing the Christian and Muslim minorities in India rather than in Hinduizing them. This might seem like splitting a particular fine hair to the outsider, but it reflected a subtle realignment with Hindutva. It should be noted that the Indian government, both in the language of India Constitution adopted in 1950 and subsequent legislation has virtually adopted the Hindutva definition of Hindu as one who belongs to any religion of Indian origin. Hence, the need in the modern study of Hinduism to distinguish one who is Hindu under Indian law from one who is Hindu by religion. The imposition of emergency by Mrs. Indira Gandhi towards the end of June in 1975 set a new series of forces in motion. It is now widely held that the only major elements in public life Mrs. Gandhi could not successfully suppress during the emergency, despite a vigorous attempt to do so, were the elements associated with Hindutva. This is what really accounts for its subsequent legitimation in the public eye. During this phase, the Hindutva forces were ironically also in eclipse after the new government took office because they had decided to merge their identity in the Janta Party, which consisted of the combined opposition, which has been electorally victorious in victorious in 1977. Once again, the Hindutva forces had gone cultural as they had been prior independence in 1947. On page number 25 of the reading. The Hindutva forces have always been secure in their cultural identity. It is their explicit political role they feel unsure about. Once again, the political had lapsed into the cultural. Significantly, the Janata Party broke up over the issue of requiring its former Jan Sangh members to go beyond formal merger with the Janata Party and also renounce their RSS connection, at which the Jan Sangh barked, splitting the Janata Party in 1980. The issue is elliptically known as the dual membership issue. This period is sometimes referred to as an return to political untouchability, originally stemming from the guilt of being associated with Mahatma Gandhi's assassination. The eclipse was to last a decade. With the re-emergence of BJP after 1990, the question of dual membership has surfaced again in another or more congenial form now that the BJP is no longer a political pariah in the form of its insistence on the one hand that it has not abandoned his its stance on Ram Temple, Article 356 and the Uniform Civil Code, and its claim on the other that it is committed to the common program of NDA National Democratic Alliance, in which BJP is the linchpin which excludes these issues. The issues of dual membership is obviously symmetric with the double decker significance of the Hindu, Indian, or Hindu. What requires further comment is more central issue of Hindutva identity. Now, as the section 8, the issue of Hindutva identity is best investigated by exploring the thought of its three main ideologies. On this point, Vinayak Damodar Savarkar, popularly known as Veer Savarkar, Mahadev Shadasiv Golwalkar, otherwise known as Guru Golwalkar, and Balraj Mohak. The basic template of Savarkar's thought was presented earlier, so one needs to focus on the transformation of his legacy in the hands of those who followed him. In the hands of Guru Golwalkar, it underwent two interesting modifications. First, Hindu identity was promoted in his thought at the expense of caste identity. Hindutva forces have looked askance at caste in general, holding it responsible in good measure for the downfall of Hindus. But most Hindutva reactions to it have been reformist. Golwalkar aim, however, it was to abolish caste so as to build a nation defined as an aggregate of individuals. This nation, however, is not defined as a secular but as Hindu nation. Golwalkar's definition of a nation was more restrictive than Sarvarkar. Hindus appear in his writing as The Nation in India. Such integration in Hindu terms also reflected a stronger sense of separation from other religious communities within India in contrast to overtures V.D. Savarkar's made these communities on account of their Hindu genes. Golwakar wrote, the foreign races in Hindustan must either adopt the Hindu culture and language, must learn to respect and hold in reverence Hindu religion, must entertain no ideas but those glorifications of Hindu race and culture, or may stay in the country, wholly subordinated to the Hindu nation, claiming nothing, deserving no privileges, far less any preferential treatment, not even citizens' right. If, however, the ethic element is emphasized in Golwalker's thought at the expense of the universe, the case is the reverse in some ways. In the thought of Balraj Madhok, as a member of Jan Sangh, recommended that it should renounce the Sangathanist RSS model and its specification identity to submerge itself in this tide of Hindu traditionalism, and this was to go hand in hand with the Indianization of Muslim and Christians, but that it was called Indianization constitutes a significant difference in nuance from Golwakar's ideology. Now, here's the section ninth. The time has come to try to relate these evaluation or even convolutions of Hindutva to the basic thesis of the power that, like the word Hindustan and Hinduism, the word Hindutva is also caught up in the ambiguity and ambivalence of the word Hindu. On page number 27 of the reading, post independence conceptual developments in Hindutva basically turned on two differential axes of religion, culture, and nation state. Hindutva thought in general has tried to align itself with the cultural axis in terms of the first set of terms and with the nation axis in the second set of terms. Out of religion or culture division, culture would be viewed as a broader category, just as the nation would be viewed as a broader category in relation to state. Hindutva thought then has tried to connect itself with the more encompassing of the paired categories, even occasionally at the expense of the other. Its agenda has been to thereby solve the problem of the presence of non-Hindu elements in Indian society and polity, primarily of Muslims and Christians, and secondarily of such Buddhist Jains and Sikhs as do not respond to the general interpretation of the term Hindu it offers, by inviting them to partake only of Hindu culture and but only of Hindu culture and not religion. It wants to make it socially easier for these communities to become parts of larger whole. It seeks to accomplish the same end politically by defying itself with their aspiration of nationalhood as opposed to the machinery of state, so that all could then belong to the Hindu nation in this reconstituted society, and the state could then be effective secular. It is significant that the Hindutva rhetoric to this day has largely and centrally been that of a nation rather than of a state. Uh, the key category is not Hindu statism, but Hindu nationalism. The internal contradiction of the word Hindu, however, imperil these exercises whether one turns to religion or culture. One crucial move Savarkar initiated was the tendency to associate Hinduism with the culture rather than religion. His motive in doing so was to create a conceptual category of Indian religions, but with this end constitutionally achieved, it soon evolved the locution of Indian culture from within the space inside Indian religions to embrace all the religious parties practiced in India in a manner analogous to the way it was employed by Savarkar to embrace all Indian religions while situated within Hinduism. though the concept of Hindu on page number 28 of the reading. This crucial curiously corresponds to that usage in 18th century, in the light of which designations such as Hindu Muslim and Hindu Christian were not oxymorons, with this difference that at time an explicit pan Indian identity in terms of Hinduism was not in the picture, as in now the case. This shift in terms of discourse also carries with it the same bivalence which characterized the word in its earlier appearance as Hindu, Hindustan, and Hinduism. Philip H. writes perceptively. Modern interpretation of Indian culture have generally fallen into two broad classifications. The first has identified Hindu cultural and with Indian cultures, suggesting that the operating norm of all latter has been great tradition of the Hindu religion and social structures and customs that have accompanied the tradition. This we show most clearly in the political area, for example, in the Jan Sangh ideological platform and its attempt to direct modern Indian political activity. Another interpretation, namely that Indian's culture is a composite, not be identified with the term Hindu, has been more realistic in recognizing that contemporary Indian culture, like all widespread and long enduring cultures, has been the product of many influences from the early Dravidian of 35 or more hundred years down to the British and Western of the last 100 or 200 years. This approach recognizes the variables and imponderables that at any given time work together to constitute a culture. Indian thinkers who adhere to this position have also emphasized with pride Indians' powers of assimilation and its potential as a cultural model for the modern world. This will reflect some of both positions of 19th century reforms movement and social cultural ambivalence of liberation intellectual political elite of 20th century. Two conceptions of Indian culture now view with each other of for acceptance with the word in with the word Hindu. The two references in terms of region or religion were in contention, which with the word Hindustan. This bivalence took the form of nature of the region itself. In the realm of religion, it surfaced in the ethnic and in the universalistic orientation of Hinduism, and now it manifests itself in the realm of culture. These developments reflect a difference in emphasis in terms of the evolving worldview, or at least Indian view of for Hindutva, on page number 29 of the reading, but along with them a more potential significant conceptual divide now surfaces, which can only be mentioned here and cannot be dealt with at length because in Hindutva circles itself it is only mentioned and not developed. This issue turns on the question of whether the Hindutva movement is directed towards the formation of Hindu nation or a Hindu state. The concept of nation state merges the two obscures the point, but it needs to be addressed squarely in the context of a country like India. Actually, a similar problem can be identified in the context of the nation itself, where the crux of the issue lies in the distinction between a multi-nation state and nation state. Given its pluralism, India has it in effect usually functioned as a multi-nation state, whether under Asoka or Akbar or the British. The attempt to unify India with the cultural nationalism of white umbrella, when it has always been polychrome, revives the old ambiguity of whether Hinduism means land or people or religion or culture. The ambiguity now begins to manifest itself within the category of state itself, national or multinational. This is this in addition to question whether one has in mind an Indian state or a Hindu state. The last piece of the puzzle incarnates the original conundrum. Section 10th of the reading, Hindutva thus comes full circle in trying to solve the problem of Hindu identity with that Hindutva identity. It ends up becoming part of problem once again. One may now be on a different part of the tree, but one is still up to the same tree. This should not be taken to mean, however, that our exercise has been in vain. Such an exercise does allow us to posit a bivalent Hindu reality capable of multiple formulation in several ways: local or global, geographical or civilized, ethical or universal, and so on. It also enables one to identify for attempts to engage this ambivalent Hindu historical empirical reality in terms of categories of first religion, second religion, third culture, and fourth nation. First reason, second religion, and third culture, and fourth nation. The first attempt is represented by the word Hindustan, the second word represented Hinduism, the third by the expression Hindu culture, and fourth by term Hindutva. Now on page number 30 of the reading, the list of words which compose the title of essay acquired the complexion of an inventory as a result of this exercise. Because of complex nature of Indian reality, each approach runs into its own limitations. Each generates its own dilemma. The regional approach generates the dilemma: does India belong to Hindus, or do Hindus belong to India? The religious approach generates the dilemma: is Hinduism a religion like any other religion, or does it itself include other religions denominationally or universalistically? The cultural approach generates the dilemma: is Hindu culture constitutive of Indian culture or expressive of it? And finally, the national approach generates the dilemma: should India opt for the secularism of Hinduism for Hinduism of secularism? At the heart of each lies the question central to all issues identified: does the other belong to me, or do I belong to it? Uh, faculty of in Now afterwards this there is a bibliography, that is that references included in the text l- read above. Thank you.